Hello my fellow hunters, in a digital event today Capcom announced the Gore Magala, which were already leaked on Reddit for the third title update. So for me personally it wasn't a big surprise that Gore Magala is coming to as free DLC to the game, and this video I'm talking about whether it's worth it, or especially how the chaotic Gore Magala are working, because they had in the previous games a special mechanic which no other weapons have. So maybe you guys played this game, Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, or this one, which I also streamed a lot on my Linux PC, is Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. So in these two games, the chaotic Gore Magala appeared, and for the calculations, I'm just using this game, Generations Ultimate, because this game uses the true raw values, and for Ultimate uses the bloated raw values. So I just comparing the old weapon stats from the Switch axis and show you how they're working. So the mechanic I'm showing you later in the video is that the chaotic Gore Magala Switch axis, or the chaotic Gore Magala weapons, had both negative affinity, which is about -30 or so, and a positive affinity, which is about 15. The negative affinity represents Gore Magala, and the positive represents Shagaru Magala, and depending on whether you overcome the virus, the negative affinity is inverted and gets added to the positive affinity. So that means if you have a Switch Axe with -30% crit or 15% crit, depending on the state, it can be added up to get 45% affinity, and I'm gonna now explain you the math after I've taken this games back into my whatever's called in English, I didn't know the name. So maybe you already know this webpage. This is the following webpage. It is called Monster Hunter Rise Switch Axe Data Finished. This was the spreadsheet for vanilla games, and I'm pretty surprised there are still some users on this page. And we just go to the following tab, which is very old. It's called History, and there I previously, some times ago, compared some weapon to them and see how it changed. So there are some weapons like Rex Knash also, where the raw over time was the same, and at the most times there aren't a lot of changes. One example was Teostra's Castle, which got over the generations a huge of changes from 170 raw to 210. So over time this weapon got a huge amount of buffs. And yes, other weapons like Nike's Crescent always the same. That's with about 180, 190 true raw with always 40% crit. Yes, and also some others like Grand Chaos, very different all the time with the crit and the raw, so it is very different and depending on the weapons. So the thing I've done, I've just searched for the free weapons from Generations Ultimate, and we already knew how the stats are from the current gen. So now what is currently better in Sunbreak? In Sunbreak the Eisenherz is better. The reason is on the La Conclusion it is mathematically better from the stats, but there's only level 1 Rampage Deco, so you can't upgrade it to a level 3 Rampage Deco, which made the use of Switcher Tool, which is absolutely necessary if you have a Power File, and all Gore Magala weapons have a Power File. So a Power File with Switcher Tool is absolutely recommended for if you want to do some decent DPS. For Elemental File it is not a problem, you can also use a level 2 Rampage slot, but for Power Files you should absolutely aim for the Switcher Tool. Yes, and La Conclusion can't really get this Rampage slot. I don't know whether after the update you can add 2 Rampage slots, then it would be maybe competitive, but currently mathematically with all the slots and the other stuff, Eisenherz is a little bit stronger than the La Conclusion, because it can't make use of a Switcher Tool. I also previously talked about the mechanic, which I'm showing you later. So first of all, I just show you the two other weapons which we are gonna comparing. So yes, you maybe already know the spreadsheet. The name of the chaotic Gore Magala switch X is called Fravel or Sources. There is already a mod on Nexus Mods. I did a commission to Shiva PO Best BB, and I also did some speedruns with this layered weapon design. So nothing special in some arena hunts. First of all, to the Gore Magala switch X, which has in Generations Ultimate about 310 raw and 20 element with 30% grid. So all in all, the changes to Sunbreak were a little bit a nerf of the raw and the grid, and elements got buffed. So like they are doing it with the most of the weapons. Yes, and 320 raw were pretty much correct. If you consider the Atalcar weapons had about 330 true raw, very competitive weapon with a huge amount of crit. And I also played it a lot when in my streams from Generations Ultimate, if you remember correctly. And yes, I also later switched to the Shagaru Magala weapons in Generations Ultimate because it has an insane amount of crit and also some better element. Mathematically, for Generations Ultimate, the Eisenherz were a little bit stronger because of the better raw. But Shagaru, in my opinion, looks a little bit nicer because it has a snake design more like, with this snake eye here. And yes, it's just other colorized, but I prefer design in the post. And you can see, like I've done previous you, this weapon got a lot more buffs, an insane buff of 30 true raw with 30 element and a slightly nerf of the crit. So in comparison to the Eisenherz, this weapon got pretty much buffed, but for the compensation it only has a level 1 rampage slot, so I think at the end of the day they are pretty much balanced. Yes, so in Generations Ultimate, Eisenherz were a little bit stronger because it has 30 more raw and element doesn't really care in Generations Ultimate. Yes, and now in Sunbreak, Eisenherz is a little bit stronger, like I already explained. Now to the chaotic Gore Magala switch X, which is called Fravel Sources. It has not the highest amount of raw, 300 raw, 22 element, and depending on which port it represents of the monster, the Gore Magala port has negative 30% crit and the Shagaru Magala port has 15% crit. And this is gonna add up, you can see here in the picture from the charge plate. If you're doing a regular fight, what the heck is going on? The stat, the negative stat can get inverted and add up to the positive, so it can get a crit amount of 45%, okay? So let's do the morph. Let's say they got the same stats. It's like 300 raw with 22 element, and depending on whether you're recovered from the frenzy virus, please take in consideration that you only get that negative affinity inverted for a selected amount of period of time. So you didn't have 100% uptime, the 45% crit. So this means this weapon gets up to 300 raw, 22 element, and 45% crit. So this is very competitive to the general Gore Magala switch X, but it means it has 10 less raw, but 15% more crit. Yes, and then you have to take in consideration that you're only maybe about 60% or 70% of the time you have that buff of the 45%. So that means at the end, the Gore Magala switch X is still stronger. There was also a video I highly recommend this, from Gaijin Hunter, and I think also recently a lot of users watched the video. It's called, yes, Gore Magala weapons. And in this video, he explained that the weapon can invert that negative crit into positive crit. I didn't know exactly here, okay. There is the gouge at the top left, you can see here. And for example, you can see you can gain that buff in the case of Generations Ultimate for 45 seconds, where you gain that additional negative affinity added to the positive one. Yes, so you can tell in the comments how you think about that new weapon mechanic. The weapon mechanic was already worked in let's say for you and in Generations Ultimate, and I think it's really fun to play with this new weapon mechanic. I personally think it isn't really competitive because it is not very consistent affinity, and also the Switch X didn't really have that much benefits of the affinity unless you go for full grounded playstyle with a Switcher Jewel, which we also need. So my personal opinion, I think especially the Switch X isn't really that competitive. But yes, otherwise Capcom give a huge buff to this weapon, and also the element in general from the Gore Magala weapons wasn't really that high, and I think that still the Death Stench Switch X is the best. So thanks for watching. See you later, guys.